Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Hunter-Cox. Being enabled and providing technical assistance is Trent Saracini, and we will be monitoring the chat in case you have a question. We are recording this, and we will share it across the network. And so the purpose of today's visit is to talk a little bit about a review of how we stack against the other Teacher Practice Network members, because, you know, we're competing because we believe at the end of year 2 there will be follow-up funding to the networks who have been the most successful. We received a multi-page report that Teresa sent to you all, so you could look at the report and make sure that you have the information that we had at the end of year 1. And we want to emphasize just a couple of points as we go through the presentation of areas that we would like to make some course adjustments. Of course, I want to welcome all of our partners from Oklahoma, as well as the Arkansas participants who are with us today. So let's get started, but please send me a chat if you have a question. Today we are going to be reviewing what the end of the first year report said. It did report all the data from the networks on both high and low touch activities. And the overall goal, if you'll remember, at the end of our 2-year program was for us to have trained 1,000 teachers in high-touch activities. Currently, based on this report, our network trained 1,154 teachers in high-touch activities that were documented, and to train 10,000 teachers in light-touch activities. At the end of year 1, our network had trained 245,150 teachers in terms of light touch. And of course, we have to honor Suzanne Rogers, who had quite a responsibility in that contribution of that many teachers. So here at the end of year 1, we have met our year 2 program goal. But that doesn't mean we don't want to show progress in year 2. In fact, we have quite a bit of money set aside to pay the teachers for their projects once they document the involvement in either high touch or light touch activities. Now, how is high touch defined? It was defined as activities that engage participating teachers in two-way interactions. And that engaging included some kind of activity or dialogue. That is the official definition right now. Light touch were defined where teacher leaders disseminated information or materials. And I want us to talk in a little bit about what kind of materials that did not necessarily engage in a two-way conversation. Overall, the initiative at the end of year 1 did define 8 modes of dissemination, and we will talk about those in detail. There were noted by the evaluators some limitations of the data, and we're going to kind of quickly talk about these. They would have liked for the teachers to track individual participants over time, which did not occur. And they would like to know if it was a standalone activity or part of a series that took place over time with a stable group of teachers, like always meeting with your PLCs and counting that activity. We had participants who did all of those 3 different kinds of examples, but the researchers couldn't really tell it from the documentation that was established. They also noted, and this is important to our TPN network, there is a possibility that content hours received by participants were underestimated. And when we talk about our overall narrative report on just our network, that was one of the indicators that they listed, that because documentation had not occurred, then more teachers probably participated and more contact hours were received by participants than we were able to document. Now, some of the other limitations of the data were that the light touch didn't specify analytics that were used to count, and each of the individual networks explained what analytics they were using. A little later in our conversation, I'll show you the analytics and how they've been systemized, and then I'll show you what we turned in. And it seems like most of the analytics we used were the analytics then chosen by the researchers. And perhaps the greatest limitation was there were no real narratives for the researchers to be able to understand exactly what the training was. And you have to remember, our network is a network of teachers across 2 states. We are not focusing on a specific content area. And some of the other partners focus especially on Algebra 1 or on history. And so our data does look a little different than their data. So let's dive right into the data. There were 104 teacher leaders that reported, and out of those 104, 26 had documented information in our scale that was sent to the researchers. And so only 36% of our teacher leaders reported and documented their activities in year 1. That's a figure that we need to increase dramatically, and we believe we will in year 2. Although we had 25% of the teachers overall that reported, we still had a very low response rate compared to the other initiatives. In fact, we were the lowest response rate overall. This is an area we need to increase. So you'll notice here, this has the total number of teachers, program, and content hours, focusing on both face-to-face and virtual contacts. For APSRC, only 36% of our teachers reported, and they noted on this page that that was probably smaller than the actual numbers of teacher contact hours, and so hours was limited. Now, in terms of teachers served, you'll notice here the total number of teachers served was 2,876, and we were number 1. We served the largest number of teachers, and as I said earlier, we've already achieved our year 2 goal. We met this goal even with only 1/3 of our teacher leaders reporting any activity as a documented activity to count for our data set. And so I think we need to be congratulated on that. Imagine if we had had 100% reporting, we certainly would have been ahead of the curve, and we set the curve with the numbers we had. Now, one of the areas that we didn't do so terribly well on, there were how many program hours delivered. Our entire group delivered 118 hours, which was 99.6% of the total of 1,222. And so you'll notice that we're kind of midpoint in that there were 2 below us and 3 above us, and we were kind of right in the middle. All of our hours delivered were documented as face-to-face, and there was no virtual programs delivered that were counted as virtual participation. I noted that with green because that's an area we're going to want to focus on and increase for year 2. Now, teacher output. We stood out. We had the highest ratio of teachers served per teacher leader. So the average for the initiative, how many teacher leaders divided into how many served, was 27.7, and our average teacher served 44.4 teachers. So we almost doubled the number served. So that was really a great statistic for us. So the people who turned in their documentation did serve a higher number of teachers. But then with program hours, it was kind of interesting. We had an average of less than 5 hours of programming. And this is going to be a bigger issue when we talk about the summary of the research study, because the average number of hours was 11.8. But I want you to reflect on the difference. We have many categories that we share information about where DePaul, DPU, they're only focusing on algebra, and they keep the same group of teachers over an entire year. And so, of course, their numbers would be higher, or EL, because EL's on 3 particular campuses, and so they have PLCs with those teachers every single week. So even though our program delivery is a little different, we do need to raise the number of program hours delivered so that we can be in the top third and be competitive. Now remember what high touch is. It was interesting because we were right at the average with 5.1 of high touch activities in terms of the number of hours in high touch. Across all of the programs, the average was 5.9, and so we were right almost at the average point on that. How many teachers participated? The duration of high touch activities, 10% of the teachers had less than 1 hour, 16% had between 1 and 3 hours, and had 74% between 1 and 3 hours, and 16% had more than 3 hours. Again, part of that is because of the design, although I know some of you are working with your PLCs every week. We just need to make sure we get those activities documented. The next slide was interesting because it showed that 41% of the teacher leaders only did one activity. And what's critical about that is with us, we had higher proportions of teacher leaders leading just one activity. So 61% of those that turned something in had only done one activity. We certainly want to increase this dramatically in year 2. You know, we talked at the Summer Institute about doing multiple activities, of which we have funding to pay you. And so that's one of those areas we want to dramatically increase what percentage of our teacher leaders did more than one activity. Now, in light touch, some of the problems the researchers had is, and why we're a guinea pig, is there are no industry standards on analytics. And the networks defined what metrics were important to them. And part of it, the researchers felt it was the level of sophistication that the different teacher leaders had in using social media, as well as the metrics. And we have some clear examples of that. In light touch, in the social media areas, of course, we have a Twitter group, we have a Pinterest, we have a Facebook, and some of the other groups had LinkedIn. And these are the metrics that tried to estimate how many educators were reached and touched with these social media areas. For website, which was interesting, and I'll show you our numbers in website in just a minute, they counted views, comments, and followers, and those were used as the metrics. I believe we had a very low figure of website, and so we have changed our practice, and we're going to show you how we are now calculating an analytic on our website contacts. It's hard to really say based on the analytics if the users are really educators, and the researchers did acknowledge that the numbers given, there could be duplication because people who are social media oriented may visit different social media platforms. I know that I do, and I'm sure many of you do. Now, in terms of light touch reach by all of the different networks, you'll see the numbers there. So much of that social media, 271,000, was our 244,000. But see, website posts, 48,000. That's one of the areas we didn't do very well in. So let's look at our numbers. No one was counted as presenting at a conference last year. And I know that we're now doing teacher to teacher and sponsoring you at conferences. So I assume that number will go up dramatically. We ended up with 210 for file sharing, where total was 6,427. In terms of mass email, we ended up with 205, and there were 71,471. One of the things we may start counting and calculating is our e-newsletter that's sent out weekly here from APSRC, because the other networks counted their mass emails to their entire list. Printed materials, we had none, but there were just 83 overall, and we don't want to go back to printing. Social media, we were astoundingly above everyone else. Video with YouTube, we had 102 out of the 126 overall. So those of you that are putting things on our YouTube channel, we certainly beat everybody in that area. But website posts, we had a total of 540, but overall in the network, there were 48,000. This is something that we are now starting to develop an analytic that we can share at the end of year 2. And in fact, here's a copy of our month-to-date analytic. This is the analytic taken on our above and beyond the core, where the Teacher Practice Network lives. This month, we've had 763 visitors, of which 697 visited for the first time. Those visitors looked at 3,600 pages, and at the time we took the data, there was one person online. But the 41% bounce rate, that's if they went to the site, looked at one page, and didn't go any further. And so we are now, Trent Saraceni is now calculating this for all of us, and we will include it in our website as part of our record for next year. Now, it was kind of interesting to me about geographic coverage, because we were documented as reaching educators in 12 states. The only group above us was one of our others, Battelle for Kids, and they basically were in 30 states. Part of this narrative, if you don't read anything else, go about 2/3 of the way back of the report and read the network profile on us. The researchers said, based on just their quantitative data, we appear to emphasize breadth and scale over intensity, meaning because we have less than an average of 5 hours of contact time, we are not having the intensity that the other providers are, but that we employ large numbers of teacher leaders that serve large number of educators with a broad menu of topics and modes of dissemination. So I saw all of that as extremely positive. We want to keep our numbers up there in year 2, and we want to continue to add into Instagram and some of our other tribes. In the network profile, they did show that educators were served just over 5 hours, and this is substantially less than 2 networks, but more than 3 networks. This is something I want to make sure that if you're doing something with your PLCs over time, you absolutely document those number of hours so we can increase that. By far, we serve the largest number of teachers in high-touch activities, and the average number of teachers served by the teacher leader was 44, which again was the highest of all the participating groups. I don't see that going down. I think that's going to continue to be one of our highlights. We had 26 teacher leaders who documented a total of 43 high-touch activities. Those 26 teacher leaders are just 36% of our network, and so they felt that we would likely reach more teachers than were reported because our problem was in documentation. We placed a strong emphasis on social media and, of course, had the highest reach. And you'll note that even though we outperformed everyone in that area, there were a couple of reported reaches that I didn't have figures for because it had not been accumulated over the entire month. Of the activity reported, only 2 were seen as part of a series with a specific group of teachers over time. And I know more of you are doing that, especially with your PLCs and your school-based groups, so we just need to get that documented. And remember, we'll pay you for every single time, and so that's very important to us. A lot of the activities involve large groups, and they gave a couple examples. One 8-hour activity from a teacher leader involved 297 teachers, and one 1-hour activity reported by 2 involved 164 teachers. I think the reason those 2 were highlighted, I think they were both conferences, but they weren't counted as conferences. In fact, I know the 2 teachers with the 1-hour activity was definitely a conference, and so we're going to have to be more discreet about how we report that. Half of our activities, 21 of the 43, serve groups smaller than 30. And I see that as positive too, because we're then performing our trainings on our campuses with smaller groups or within our district, which is appropriate. Another thing is there were a wide range of individual topics. I thought that was a plus. We're not focusing just on one thing. And they hated to infer, but it appeared that our large cadre offering a wide number of topics delivered in some workshop, then each individual teacher is leading a small amount of activity as a rule. So we need to both increase the number of people we're training and how we're documenting so that we can receive credit and be competitive when the next round of funding comes in. At this point, I want to share with you that we have $60,000 in the budget this year, and we don't want to give any of that back to Gates. We want that to be paid to the teachers who document what they're doing. And so please, please, please document the activities and the trainings that you are doing. I don't think we're going to run out of money. I would love it if we could. Now, the next couple of slides are for evaluation geeks like me. But the reason I want to share them with you is because the evaluators had some summary statements. Usually, evaluator summary statements then turn into what the funder funds next. So I want you to reframe these a little bit to think about these as questions that have not been answered, and they're trying to narrow what the funder would like to know. So number one, we're curious about how networks assess the value of different modes of work, high touch versus light touch, given the ways they emphasize them in year one. Because the numbers were spread all around with all of the different providers, they're wondering if we favor one more than another. And I would have to say our highest scores were in light touch, utilizing social media, but anyone that looked at our training over year one would see that was certainly where the emphasis was. Number two, for those networks where the majority of teachers are leading just one or two activities, often very short 1 hour activities, we wonder if the leadership or the ripple effect will be adequate in terms of reaching teachers. So what they're talking there is, do you really change teacher practice? So we've added this year the survey at the end of trainings, and that's really to find out and try to answer that second question. Does it take more systemic interaction to change teacher practice? Or can a engaged, one-time, engaged activity really change a teacher's practice or how they think about one part of the teaching act? Another thing, they are worrying about the quality of high-touch activities, and are there ways to make that more powerful? And so they'd really like to go deeper into high-touch activities and make a decision about these are the things that encourage teachers to change their practice. And I think this bottom one is kind of the crux of where the next funding will be looking at. We're also curious about the value that the project and the funder places on scale of reach versus intensity of teacher experience. Is it better to serve 1,200 teachers with 5 hours or to serve 500 teachers with 15 hours? Well, if they want to study that, I think we can certainly help them with that, because we definitely have a lot of teachers with less than 5 hours of training. Some of the other outcomes, it turns out that high touch, that almost every single one of those activities were face-to-face. There was no virtual coaching seen except with just a few teachers. 95 educators, or 3%, got to experience virtual coaching. And they're wondering how much the value of the project and the funder places on experimenting with high-touch activities that can be conducted at a distance, because currently none of us are doing virtual coaching by their definition of virtual coaching. So they wonder if that's something they would like to study and have Gates fund in the future. And then they're worried about and interested in finding out, are there some different tools that are more or less suited to touch more teachers and have a more powerful message? And so they're really looking to see, do I get bigger bang for my buck from blogs or Facebook, or what tool would lead to the biggest amount of change? Now, it's interesting because our summary statement was that we had 26 teachers who participated in high-touch activities, who were 36% of our overall group, and their explanation was, we believe that all of the 72 shared information in high touch, but we only turned in those that turned in document to us. So they're saying they believed from the narratives we gave them that all teachers provided something, but that the problem was documentation. I shared with them that was my feeling, so we really need to get on documentation. after our our fall institute, Teresa just shared with me this week how many people are putting their documentation on the site, and I'm very pleased about that. And just remember that we will be writing checks again before the Christmas shopping season. So maybe I should go into commercial mode right now. But we want you to go ahead and list everything you're doing as they occur. Now, what was fascinating to me was the 9 states or the 12 states that we're in. And I don't know who has relatives in those states and have told them to join our website. Oklahoma and Arkansas, of course, are given. I wasn't surprised about Texas. I guess Massachusetts, maybe New Jersey kind of surprised me, but I'd be really interested in seeing that data. So that's kind of a summary of the report. So at this time, I would be glad to take any questions you might have.
I have some chat issues.
Okay. Okay, we've got lots of chats. Yay. Okay, Renee had a question. Virtual programs, is that for high touch only? No, you can do virtual coaching, Renee, and it can be interactive utilizing Google Hangout, and that could be light touch also. Was the low number of activities due to teachers trying to find what worked for them? Will it increase now that they've found their niche? It really might. I do think year one we had a lot of experimenting, and so I'm encouraged with the numbers that we're seeing right now. What would website post include? It would include having you sharing the website address with others where you post it, because that would then drive our numbers on the website up. We asked that same question, and we asked to the partner that had the largest website contacts, and they basically use their website to put lessons of study out. And so we asked how they documented that, and they told us by their analytics. And Teresa answered that very well. Okay. And Renee, I love your idea about using the PV Bites and the blog. And Jean, yes, you should report your mass emails. And we're going to start reporting ours too. And if you could gather that in analytics and put them up once a month, I think that would help. Okay. I agree with Lisa. Get that documentation turned in. You do not have, Sarah, you do not have to, if you've had a conversation with one of us about what you're planning to do, just go ahead and get started. How do we update our analytics? And this is interesting because we are now tracking them monthly, Suzanne, and we'd be glad to have a conversation about what analytics you're using and if there's a way to pull it off each month and then do a documentation at the end of that month. Trent's doing that for us, and he'd be glad to talk to you about analytics and do the research for that. And so, and Teresa, I'm glad you're collecting Suzanne's into a folder. And if each of the tribes can, I think, challenge themselves to double what they've been doing to this point this year, I think that would be a way that we would be hands above everyone else. we certainly beat the other partners in areas, and we've been getting emails from people about how'd you do it. And of course, Suzanne, we direct them to the article that Wested did for you. Yeah, don't be worried. We think we're in good shape. We just have some areas that we want to improve. Jean, virtual coaching. If I'm working with a PLC and I work with them every week, I can put an electronic agenda out. I can be connected with them via Google Hangout, and I do not have to be in the room with them. That's an example of virtual coaching. That's a simple example. Okay, I'm going to let you go ahead. I'm going to cover just a few more slides, and then we'll come back to the chat and see if anybody had anything else to offer. Teresa, I can have you talk about this, or I can. I know if Jenna, or go ahead.
You can. I mean, I suppose everybody can hear me. We just wanted to get that word out that the registration is open for the ESET 2 conference that should be held in December. And I think there'll be an email blast coming out with like flyer and more specific information in the next day or so. Go ahead.
We would encourage people from Oklahoma to come and see it, because we'd be glad to help you write an application for an Oklahoma ECET2 for next year, G, and Oklahoma partners.
Yeah, Jean, if you could grab a TPN person or two that might be interested, you know, and come, then that would be awesome. So that'd be a great ripple effect.
We also are going to be able to count all those contacts as part of TPN, because we got approval from Wested to do that. And then we have 2 more save the dates, because we know how busy everyone is. We're going to be again at Lake Point Conference Center. I think everybody enjoyed our time there last time. And we will have a meeting on February 16th and 17th. And then our Summer Institute's going to be July 17th, 18th, and 19th. And by that time, we ought to be talking about the next set of funding. Anybody got anything else? Okay. Suzanne, is there a specific area in which we should concentrate? You know, it's interesting because anything that supports implementation of Common Core, and, you know, that's a pretty broad. That's why I think our things have been kind of broad across a whole bunch of different areas. If anyone has anything to do with MDC or LDC, that's an area you could do a series on. But I really think that when we got together in the summer and talked about doing a series of activities, I would just break it down into like 3 or 4 things that you're going to do over time. And so think of a little bit broader. And I have to say to Sarah Richardson, I think your video clips have been very effective. So think of something that you can go deeper into, doing an introduction, talking about how to do it in your classroom, and then a follow-up I think would be perfect. So I'm looking at series of 3 or 4 things. I'm going to probably offer some things during the legislative session. Of course, that would only be for Arkansas, but we'll try to keep you all on target of the things being discussed in the legislature. So I was thinking I might do a series on legislative issues, and it might be 1 every 2 weeks during the session. So think about it that way. How can you organize it And if anybody wants to brainstorm and have a conversation with me, the number here at APSRC is 501-492-4300. And I think whatever, as Teresa said, whatever people are talking about. The whole purpose of today was to share the research report because we're very transparent about everything we get back from Gates. You all remember we shared the survey information back to you. And so please make sure, even though it was a little boring, if you have any questions about what the evaluators were attempting to address, or if you want to share your feedback with them, just let us know. Sarah, you are right. We can videotape anything just like we videotape this, and it will be put on the website so we can direct people there to that link to increase our website numbers. Yes, registration for ECET2 is coming out. It's going to be a great time together. And Suzanne, I agree with you. The more people doing presentations, the happier I'm going to be. We just now know they're counting them as conferences, so we just need to put in our documentation, conference presentation at. We were just not discreet enough last time. They didn't know what ACC was. I hear someone typing, so we're going to let them finish. So I encourage everyone to get your documentation in so I can write you a check. Nothing makes me happier. And what's going to make me sad is if I have to give any money back to Gates, which we do not want to do. So on that note, I say thank you for everyone for joining, and let us know what assistance you need from any of us here at APSRC. And of course, Teresa's ready to help you at any time. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great evening.